with Tim Hague. First of all, Tim, congratulations on a roller coaster first round victory. You got tagged by a couple big shots, but you got through it, you got the takedown. You've got to be happy about getting the submission and getting the victory.
Yeah, one thing about me is you're never ever going to see me quit. You can turn my face to mashed potatoes and I'm going to keep coming. I want to say I love my wife and my baby boy. Thanks, Bree and Brady. That's tough guy. Hit me with the straight left. Busted my nose, I think, but it's all good. I'm ready to drink some beers.
Well, congratulations on your victory. Very exciting fight. We look forward to seeing you again. Tim Hague, ladies and gentlemen.
I just want to say a big thanks to Mr. White and both Mr. Fertitas for having me. I hope to fight a lot for you guys. Thank you.
I think we'll see you again, my friend. Tim Hague!
Canadian kid who's ready to have a beer. Let me put on my surprise face.
And now, the moment of truth you've all been waiting for has now finally arrived.
From knockouts to tap-outs.
It's all over!
Inside the octagon and beyond.
Is this not real now? Are we pretending?
We're rich, baby. Break out the red panties.
This is the MMA Report with John Pollard.
Unbelievable! Here we go!
Hello and welcome to the MMA Report. I am John Pollock. Thank you for tuning in. We've got a lot to get to on today's show, and I'm going to preview what is ahead. But it's been a very sad week in mixed martial arts. Off the top there, we want to dedicate this show to Tim Hague, who passed away on Sunday, on Father's Day no less. A very unfortunate tragedy. We are going to be discussing the passing of Tim Hague, the circumstances coming out of his boxing fight he had last Friday that ultimately led with the end of his life. We are going to be speaking about that in depth on today's show. I also want to make mention off the top of the passing of Bryan Levick, who was someone that worked in the public relations area in mixed martial arts. He worked for Titan FC as well as for other organizations during his career. The news came out through Titan on Thursday of his passing. Not somebody that I knew very well, but did interact with through email, and somebody that you just always knew that name. So I just want to send my condolences as well to both the families of Tim Hague and Bryan Levick. And our thoughts are, of course, with Matt Hughes and his family. Last Friday, Matt Hughes was hit by a train while he was in a truck. He is said to be in stable condition, and we're obviously hoping for the best for Matt Hughes during this time period as well. It's just been a very depressing week to go through with all of this news. On today's show, we are going to be joined by Erik Magraken, who is a lawyer that has been on this show before. He runs combatsportslaw.com, which is a tremendous resource when it comes to the legal issues of mixed martial arts, somebody that understands the industry with a legal background, and that's his full-time job. We're also going to be chatting, of course, with Cody Saftic, and then we'll have a pair of Bellator fighters on the show. Lightweight champion Michael Chandler will be returning as he will be defending his title against Brent Primus this coming Saturday night at Madison Square Garden. It's Bellator's first pay-per-view in over 3 years since they ran back in 2014. They are taking place from the Garden on Saturday. Also on the show, making his Bellator debut, will be Ryan Bader, who challenges Phil Davis on the Spike portion on Saturday night, happening at 8 Eastern. And we're going to chat with Bader about leaving the UFC, coming to a new organization, and with that, the ability to once again bring on sponsors. It's a big issue within the combat sports world for athletes, and it's definitely a very attractive element to fighting for Bellator when you have that opportunity to take on sponsors, which the Reebok deal limited you in that sense. All right, we're going to start things off with Erik Magraken. He's been on the show before, and the Tim Hague story, especially if you're in Canada, you've seen the national reach this story has had, and it's been covered by all the major outlets. So I want to welcome on Erik, who has a expertise in the field of the legal sense of things in mixed martial arts with a full understanding of the sport. So that is where we are going to start off, and then lots more to come on today's edition of the MMA Report.
Tim Hague, a well-respected and veteran MMA fighter, came into this fight with a 1-2 boxing record. The first knockdown came just over a minute in. A minute later, after a series of heavy punches, Hague was knocked down again. By the end of the first round, he hit the mat 4 times, and with no 3 knockdown rule, he was allowed to continue each time. It was in the second round, Braidwood landed the last punch of the fight. Hague's head hit the canvas with a sickening thud, and he lay motionless for some time. He walked to the back under his own power, but would later die in hospital with his family by his side.
All right, we're back here, everybody, on the MMA Report, and we're starting off this week's show and covering the unfortunate passing of Tim Hague this past weekend following a boxing fight in Edmonton. And joining us right now, a lawyer out of British Columbia, the man who runs the combatsportslaw.com website, and an invaluable resource when we are going into legal issues specific to mixed martial arts. He is Erik Magraken, returning to the show. Erik, how are you doing this week?
I'm good, John. Thanks for having me on again.
The Tim Hague story has been much more than just a mixed martial arts story. This one has received national headlines in Canada. All the major news outlets have been covering this. I want to start with just how you found out about the story involving Tim Hague, because this was obviously a small show he was a part of. It was not a mixed martial arts fight. Just tell me your immediate reaction hearing of this story.
Yeah, I have to confess, I don't recall where I first heard about it, but it was all over social media, so I'm sure somebody was commenting on it. And, Edmonton's had its fair share of controversy on the regulatory front. And so I quickly started looking into some of their rules and regulations after hearing about this tragedy, just to see, if everything was done by the book. And it looks like there's a safety policy that arguably was ignored in licensing Tim, for this bout. And unfortunately, it looks like this might have been a preventable tragedy.
Yeah, and that's one of the issues that has come up in light of all of this, the fact that there is a bylaw in Edmonton where a fighter, after sustaining 3 knockouts within a 1-year period, you should have to wait another year. And of course, Tim, he had a number of stoppage losses in mixed martial arts, just had a knockout loss in boxing this past December, but that was not something that was addressed prior to this. And that to me was somewhat concerning, Erik, that this wasn't a bylaw that anyone had any knowledge of prior.
Right. Yeah, well, I'm sure the commission knows about their own rules and policies, and this is important, so I just want to be very accurate about this.
Sure.
It's a specific safety policy that they've got on their book, so it's not written in the bylaw, but the commission's created, and they, of course, have rules and regulations, and they have published safety policies, and one of their policies deals with post-bout suspensions. So when it comes to boxing specifically, the way it's worded is if you have 3 knockout losses or TKO losses in any given year, then the suspension the commission gives you is at least 1 year following that third KO or TKO stoppage. And so to be fair, this deals with post-bout suspensions. That being said, when the commission is making a standalone licensing decision, when Tim comes and he wants a license, there's no reason I could think of to deviate from that safety policy when you're deciding whether somebody should have a fresh license. So it doesn't really matter that he was knocked out or had TKO stoppages before in Edmonton or Russia or Lethbridge. If the man fits the wording of that policy, I think the commission is hard-pressed justifying giving a further license when he's arguably not meeting their own safety standards.
Right. And is it accurate that this safety law, is it a number of stoppages, or could it be just based off of one stoppage?
They have post-bout suspension policies based on single stoppages and multiple stoppages, so it escalates. Okay. If you have 1, if you have 2, if you have 3, and I pick 3, of course, because that's the number of bouts that he had in the calendar year with stoppages that says he should be sidelined for at least another year. Interestingly, and I mentioned this online, they seem to have different suspension policies based on the sport, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. If you're knocked out in boxing, they suspend you for a certain period of time, but if you're knocked out in a kickboxing bout or an MMA bout, they suspend you for a lesser period of time. I don't know if medically that makes a lot of sense, but in any event, they didn't follow the suspension based on boxing here, or the policy based on how long they say boxers should be sidelined after having multiple concussions.
So, from what you have followed, tell us a bit about what the Edmonton Combative Sports Commission has done in the wake of this tragedy, and are there lingering issues that you have, questions that you have?
Yeah, well, I don't have inside knowledge in terms of what they're doing. I know they've announced some sort of an internal review, and that's standard fare for any athletic commission. After a bout takes place, if something goes awry, they have to ask questions to, make sure they've done everything by the book. So I know they're conducting some sort of an internal review. The city of Edmonton themselves have come out and stated they want some kind of a third-party review, so somebody other than the commission themselves investigating themselves. And so I know that's the two sort of current steps taking place right now. For me, the question is, did the commission have knowledge of his Lethbridge knockout? So Tim reportedly fought in something called a super boxing bout in Lethbridge a few months beforehand and was given a 60-day suspension after being stopped in the first round. That suspension ran its course, but that's going to be one of these 3 KO or TKO bouts he had in the year leading up. So the question I'd want answered is, did the commission know about that? And did they know about his other previous stoppages in recent times? One of the bouts was in Edmonton, so they of course knew about that. One was in Russia, but
yes,
when you're looking up any pro fighter, and Tim's coming with an MMA background, the due diligence of commissioners is to look up their recent record, both in boxing and MMA. And mixedmartialarts.com is the official database of the ABC when it comes to MMA records and stoppages. And I know the Russian bout did make the mixed martial arts database. So the question is, did the commission do the diligence? Did they look at his recent stoppages? Did they consider them? And if they waived that policy or felt it didn't apply, I'd want to know why the commission felt he was fit for licensing, given his number of first-round stoppages in recent months.
Do you feel that this, obviously this is a horrible story, and it does shine a light on Edmonton with such a major event as the UFC bringing a card to Edmonton this September. Do you anticipate any weariness on the side of the UFC, or do you feel that this is a story that will ultimately be moved past? This event will go on as follows. Do you think that anything should be addressed before another major event comes to Edmonton?
Right. Yeah. The UFC has a really good track record of going from jurisdiction to jurisdiction and doing business. So if they want the show to go on, I'm sure they could have the show go on. But internally within Edmonton and the city council and anybody looking at it, I don't know what concerns they have. And that's the folks that have to start asking themselves some hard questions about whether they're regulating combative sports as best as possible in their city.
Just looking at this, the two of us being in Canada, I think, can understand how big of a story this became. Was that in any way surprising to you? Obviously there's a tragedy at the end of this and is going to get a lot of attention from non-MMA or combat sports followers. But I was somewhat taken aback, Erik, by just how big of a story this was nationally.
Yeah, it seemed to blow up pretty quickly, getting national headlines and even some international headlines. But whenever you have a death in a sporting contest, and I guess in this day and age when there's video of the event, these things, do tend to get media attention. So, but the good thing is a spotlight when you have safety rules in a dangerous sport, when there's a national and international spotlight being shined on it, it is a good thing. You can't undo the past, right? There's nothing that can be said or that could be done that could undo this tragedy. But if moving forward, there's changes that could be implemented, that's, perhaps the only good that could come from this. So I'm glad folks like you are paying attention, reporting on this. I'm glad other outlets like the CBC and, Globe and Mail and other mainstream Canadian outlets are paying attention to this, and hopefully Edmonton feels the pressure and they don't try to whitewash this and, say it's a dangerous sport and just move on. If there's changes that can be had, hopefully they're going to implement those very quickly.
My final point I wanted to question you about, Erik, is, the biggest story last week prior to this was, of course, the announcement of Floyd Mayweather Jr. fighting Conor McGregor. And it's been treated as, almost a circus-like fight. But to me, when an issue like this happens, and I'm not trying to make an apples-to-apples comparison, but when this tragedy occurs it really does put the spotlight on the role of a commission in licensing fighters and protecting the safety of individual fighters. And I look at that fight, Floyd Mayweather Jr., he is not maybe a knockout artist that you would necessarily look at, but he is taking on a fighter with zero professional boxing experience. And it does bring into question the conflict that certain commissions have, where Nevada would be crazy to turn down this fight for the revenue purposes. However, it completely contradicts to me what the body of a commission is designed to do, and that is make sure that they are sanctioning fights that are competitive and are not putting a certain safety risk forward to the public.
Yeah, you're right. You hit the nail on the head. There's two issues there. There's money and there's safety. And so when it comes to money, nobody could fault Mayweather or McGregor for taking this bout. It's prize fighting after all, and this is the biggest prize. So these guys come out as winners. But from the regulatory perspective, you're absolutely right. Commissions exist for fighter safety, and that's not just a soundbite. The laws that create commissions all say this is why you guys exist. So there's laws, there's regulations, there are policies, and they all speak to fighter safety. When this bout was being rumored over the last year, I think one of the Nevada commissioners, and I'm going from memory, I might get the name wrong. I think it was Bob Bennett, but I'm not 100% on that. But I know one of the commissioners came out and speculated that McGregor might not even be fit for a pro boxing license. I think this was around the time that California gave McGregor a pro boxing license. Nevada came out and, speaking to reporters, said, boy, he might not even get that kind of a license in our jurisdiction. So to go from that, saying he might not even get a pro license, to say, yeah, you got a license and you're fighting one of the greatest boxers of all time, certainly one of the greatest of this generation. It's tough to reconcile those two positions. And, it's one of those things, if something tragic was to occur there, absolutely that's going to come back and bite them. So it's tough to understand from a regulator integrity perspective how this bout was approved. But I think, money is the answer to a lot of questions in life.
Erik, it's always great to catch up with you and add a lot more context to sometimes very complicated issues. It's a very horrible story with the passing of Tim Hague, but I know that you're following this and covering it at combatsportslaw.com. You can also follow Erik at Erik Magraken, Magraken on Twitter. And it's always great to catch up with you, Erik. So thanks so much for taking some time to join us today.
John, my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Now, Hague's opponent in the ring that night was Adam Braidwood, who is speaking publicly for the first time since Hague's death.
I was in the ring, and I'll be honest with you, I was like, it's time to stop this fight. I was hoping Tim would stop it himself, and I was like, if he doesn't, then then we have to finish it until it's done. And it's nobody's fault. It's not the ref's fault. The ref asked, and if you're conscious and you're collective and you have your stuff together, I saw the video. Tim was still there, and he said he wanted to keep fighting, and so that's what happened. And that's just the truth, man. There's no speculation about it. He wanted to keep fighting, so we kept fighting.
Back here on the MMA Report, and joining us as usual, he is Fight Network's Cody Saftic. And Cody, we just heard from Erik Magraken there, and obviously the Tim Hague story is a big one because it's not just being covered as a mixed martial arts story this week. Being in Canada, this has been a national news story this week. It's a tragedy, and there's a lot of questions coming out of it.
Yeah, I think it links between all elements of combat sports, whether you are a boxing fan, whether you are a mixed martial arts fan, whether you are a pro wrestling fan, whether you're a fan of any sport that involves with head trauma. I think in some regards you can relate to this story. And Tim Hague, a guy that was just, to people that actually knew him, they knew him as a gentle giant, they knew him as a personal character, larger than life, a very willing competitor, but also a family man. So I think there's a lot of elements of sorrow to this story, and my heart absolutely goes out to the Hague family.
Because when the footage came, there was a big part of me that did not want to watch that final knockdown. Did you watch any parts of the fight? Because most of us, it was by the time the footage was available, you knew what, at the time he was still alive, but you knew how detrimental this was.
Yeah, I did review the footage. I think you have to look at things like this to see where did the commission go wrong, where did the corner go wrong, where did the referee go wrong. And if you simply just look at the final sequence and the knockout, That's a nasty knockout no matter who you are on any given day. But you got to watch the damage taken prior to that. And then you have to factor in the elements of Tim Hague was someone who had been knocked out previously many times throughout his career. And in recent years, it's not even competitive knockouts. It's first round knockouts. 40 seconds into the first round, let's say, against Jared Kilkenny, which is the most recent setback for him.
Which is a fight that I think everyone is familiar with because it's not on his MMA or boxing record. This was a hybrid. This was like boxing with MMA gloves for the super boxing show in Alberta, which was back in April, the 40-second loss you're referencing.
Yeah, exactly. So Lee Mean actually promoted the show. I believe it was a Rage in the Cage, out in Alberta, and Lee Mean, who's 50 years old, also fought in the exact same style of fight, which is essentially MMA striking without the grappling element. I believe you could take your opponent down, but then you had to let them right back up. So when I initially saw the reports coming out from various media outlets, they were all referencing the fact that he had been knocked out in December. They were all referencing the fact that he had a boxing match that was a setback, but nobody was picking up on the fact that he had fought a lot prior to that. And I think, as we were discussing a little bit yesterday, let's say a fighter, Adam Hunter, now this is a perfect example. Adam Hunter actually was a 7-1 pro MMA fighter out of Ottawa. He also spent some time out east, but Eastern Canada. He was signed to fight on the Vancouver card against Ryan Janes. He actually got pulled after weigh-ins because he was flagged by USADA. He took a 2-year ban. He fought in Ontario last weekend at an amateur Muay Thai event because even though he's a pro fighter and even though he's got a pro suspension for an USADA violation, because it's the unregulated world of amateur Muay Thai, this guy was able to go and compete. And he lost, actually. But all the same, where was the regulatory body there? Where were the people that were looking out for the safety of the athletes? How could that oversight take place? But that's the issue. It's a different sport.
Here's another question, though.
Absolutely.
In regards to whether it was a super boxing fight or when you're talking about amateur fights, where would you say the level is when it comes to easy transparency for guys' records? Because to someone that's doing a story on Tim Hague, they're going to be going to your BoxRecs or to mixedmartialarts.com, Sherdog.com for MMA records. And for a super box fight, I mean, outside of something like Fight Facts, for instance, I mean, that's not a resource that I think a lot of just average people are referencing. And granted, it should be the promoters and regulators are the ones that need to be seeing these records, and they should have that knowledge that, I mean, this happened in Alberta. But for instance, if this were to have been a fight that he took on in Montana in the middle of nowhere and then comes to fight somewhere else, I mean, that fight, there are a lot of fights that they fall under the radar that are not thrown up there on Sherdog or BoxRec.
Well, that's exactly it. It's unsanctioned. So, but that being said, a lot of damage for these fighters are actually being sustained inside the gym. And I mean, that's unregulated. That's something you can't track. So to a certain extent, maybe they go out and they compete every other weekend and they are taking a boxing match and they are taking a Muay Thai match. And it's hard to compile all these things. I mean, look at this weekend. We got Justine Quiche fighting 6-0 in pro MMA, but she has 40 Muay Thai fights. She's fought in Thailand professionally. She's won a world title. Stuff like that has to be factored in. Holly Holm can go out there and she can fight girls that are more experienced than her on paper in mixed martial arts because she has that boxing pedigree. But that stuff, like you said, your BoxRec, your Sherdog, that's all good for tracking professional results. For amateur results, it's near impossible in a lot of cases. And I'm a guy that's match made a lot of amateur fighters on events. And let me tell you, there's a lot of cases where the guy is 0-1, 0-2, 1-2, and then it turns out he's got 10 fights. I mean, it's not fully sanctioned. And that's the scary part about it, is that fighters are not necessarily getting 30-day medical suspensions. They're not necessarily getting 60-day medical suspensions. And they're going out there in unsafe environments and they're competing. And I don't want to say it's a matter of time, but we see this happen frequently in boxing where sustained damage leads to very tragic events. In MMA, if Tim Hague was taking that same fight in MMA, surely it would have been stopped in that first round. Maybe he would have never taken that concussive blow. But there's just so many elements to the story, so many ways to look at it. I think that's why it touched a lot of people and why it's such a big dominating headline this week.
I think that, you know, when something this tragic happens, the hope is that questions are asked, changes are enacted. And in this one, I think that there's a lot that you can look at here. The idea that he was knocked down 3 times and you could argue a 4th at the end of that first round, not having that 3 knockdown rule to me is crazy. If you were to watch that fight in its entirety, I think it's even more appalling.
Yeah, so the 3 knockdown rule actually isn't in effect in most commissions. I think a lot of people always just have this idea that if you go down 3 times, it's the same as Saved by the Bell. Saved by the Bell, not an actual thing in most commissions, but it's this idea that we have from, history and over time that's what happens. For me, though, as a referee, as someone that's looking at it on a neutral standpoint and it's in for fighter safety, is that you have to weigh in, does this fighter have a chance of coming back in this fight, right? If you're getting knocked down and you're getting up from this and you're still in the fight and you're moving forward and you're still defending yourself and you're landing some punches and it's somewhat of a competitive affair, then that's defending yourself. And that's rules for the fight to continue. But in Hague's case, you got to look at the whole, you mentioned, did I look at the fight? I did look at the fight, and I had to look at it closely, because before he even goes down the first time, he gets hit in the back of the head, and he complains about it. He rubs his head to the referee. Then he goes down the first time. He's already concussed by then. Then there's a head clash, I believe, prior to the second knockdown. He's swarmed after that. And then he's not there. Tim Hague's a guy that fights 5-minute MMA rounds. So his cardio should have been good enough to carry him through the first round. But literally a minute and a half into that fight, his cognitive abilities have already largely diminished. He appears to be fatigued, but he's not fatigued. He's seriously hurt. And the referee should have recognized that. And above all else, his corner should have recognized that. Because the first round, just surviving that first round was a miracle on its own. And you know what? I'd pat him on the back and I'd say, Timmy, you survived against a guy that was 7-1 and a very big power puncher, and it was a good job, but we're done here, right? Instead, you send him out knowing that it's a 10-7 opening round, a 10-6 opening round because of the pure domination on it. There's no way he's now getting back into this fight. So the only thing that can happen to him now is that he's going to sustain more damage and he's going to get stopped. And the fight, the punch that stopped him was way worse than the 3 other punches that had dropped him. It was the worst punch of the fight for sure. And then you have to weigh in the fact that his head slams against the canvas, which certainly could not have helped because he had already been hit in the back of the head prior to that. So it's a crazy situation, and I've seen conspiracy theorists on it, and at this time, I know a lot of people are arguing about who's at fault, and just that has to be argued on the proper forum. And I think, to argue to Tim Hague's family right now, or to go on his GoFundMe and say, it could have been prevented and all that, just have a little respect for the family on that side of things, I'd say.
Yeah, and we will make note of that, the fact that there is a GoFundMe set up for Tim Hague. I believe it's GoFundMe.com/Tim Hague Memorial. If you search for that you can raise money for his family. It's a really awful story. As we transition over, do you feel that this is going to is this story going to continue given the fact that the UFC is coming to Edmonton in September and that commission is going to be under a spotlight because they have to oversee that event?
Yeah, so that commission's actually been under a spotlight for quite some time.
Yes.
I mean, if you follow any of Mike Russell's work on it, fantastic journalist and someone who really digs into the deep conversations that need to be had. And I think that his whole profile on the commission is a very accurate assumption because he's bringing up actual facts. And as a fan of the sport, John, and we can even tie this back into the Tim Hague situation in that when Tim Hague fought Travis View, who's wearing a pair of UFC gloves that he had prior used in the UFC, whereas Travis View was using just the local promotion gloves, which is odd. When Sokaju fought for the commission, same thing, just weird. Joe Riggs was allowed to bring in his own gloves that he had prior used for Strikeforce and then take the gloves home after weigh-ins and then show up the next day and use the same gloves. Now, Joe Riggs is my boy. He would never cheat. I'm not suggesting that. But what kind of oversight is that? And so when I look at Tim Hague should not be sanctioned to fight in the province of Alberta. I believe it was until 2018. So how is this guy able to enter the ring? And when we talk about commissions and being strict commissions and should this fight be sanctioned and should that fight be sanctioned, and why was a guy that was 1-2 and coming off some devastating knockouts matched up with a guy that was 7-1 and, entering championship status? I mean, Adam Braidwood will likely challenge for a somewhat significant title in the foreseeable future. I mean, he's a legitimate heavyweight prospect within Canada, and Tim Hague is not. Tim Hague is a 34-year-old grade 4 teacher who shouldn't not have been in there. So do I think something's going to change? Yeah, I think a serious investigation is going to be made. I think serious looks and inquiries will be made. And I think something does change out of this. And I think for other commissions, because there's now a precedent, you have to take it seriously. Listen, everybody harps on a commission like New York because they're so strict. Man, I can't believe they didn't let Luis Henrique fight here just because he had corrective eye surgery. Well, maybe being too strict is better than just being super lackadaisical. And that's my concern here, is that the Alberta Commission there's a reason why the UFC has avoided the commission for a while. And now that they're making their debut, I mean, it's in murky waters.
And maybe we can also look at, instead of the knee-jerk reaction when we see a fight stopped and immediately jump on the referee as if they have this perfect timing of when to end a fight, that they are in a position of so much significance. And sadly, we saw the worst case scenario this past weekend, that a referee is in there to protect the safety of a fighter. And I will always take a referee that is overly cautious rather than one that is going to extend a fighter's the ability to take damage in a fight when they don't need to be doing. And that's an incredibly difficult task to put on the shoulders of a referee in this sport, where the end result could be a fatal one. As sad as that is a reality we're talking about here with combat sports.
Yeah, and not only like fatality is worst case scenario, but I look at damage sustained in a fight like that, or even if you want to look in MMA terms, I mean, recently with Miguel Falcao and his fight in Russia, that kind of damage, even if it doesn't kill you, it's going to change your life. I mean, the human body can take damage, but it can't take that type of sustained beating. The referee has one job, which is to protect the fighters. That's the job. And people, early stoppage, you know what? Early stoppage, do it again. Fight the guy again. In kickboxing, guys will fight 4 or 5 times. There's no shame in losing a fight and feeling, you know what? I could have continued. You gotta be safe. You gotta be able to be like, okay, I'm gonna be able to return to my life after fighting and have a good life. And I get a lot of fighters will tell their corners, don't stop the fight. Don't throw in the towel. I want to keep competing. But there's levels to this. And your corners, they're there to protect you as well. They care for you. But the referee, his sole purpose is to protect the fighter. He's not judging the fight. He's not cornering any of the fighters there. He's literally there to make sure that the rules are in place. And why are the rules in place? To protect the fighters. And then he's in there to make sure that someone doesn't get hurt. And in this case, it's a sustained beating. It's not one of those, that guy got knocked out and the referee should have jumped in, but he landed 2 or 3 good shots. Because it's a reaction thing. Like you said, oh my God, it happens. A couple shots to a downed opponent. Oh man, he should have got in there sooner. But a sustained beating like this, and then as a human being, you have to think, what is this man going through? And it's enough that you should just wave it off.
There is an event going on in New York this weekend, and that is Bellator's first card at Madison Square Garden, first pay-per-view in 3 years, with Chael Sonnen headlining against Wanderlei Silva. We'll also see Ryan Bader and Michael Chandler on the card, who are both going to be joining us later on in the show. What's got your interest for this card? It's, to me, one of the strongest Bellator cards to date, if not the strongest.
I mean, what doesn't have my interest on this card, John?
Aaron Pico debuting.
That's the first name I was going to throw out. But I'm sure people want to talk about, Chael versus Wanderlei, and that's a fight that's got everybody's attention. Let's face it, it's had bad blood boiling over for years, and does it have as much marquee value as it did after that season of Tough? No, I don't think so. But
it's at the lowest of my interest, to be honest.
Yeah, it's at the lowest it's been since they had that initial feud in the UFC. However, it's still a fight that people are going to want to watch. Fedor Emelianenko versus Matt Mitrione. Matt Mitrione, if he was still signed to the UFC, would be a top 10 heavyweight currently. Top 10 at the very least. He's still a top-rated guy. Fedor Emelianenko, we have a whole lot of question marks about this guy, especially coming off a Fabio Maldonado fight where, certainly had people scratching their heads. So those two fights have the intrigue, but if you want to look at prospects, Michael Chandler's got to come out here and he's got to shine. I mean, it's not a given fight against a guy like Brent Primus. I mean, it's still a tough fight, but on a night where you're featuring an old veteran like Fedor as a drawing point and old guys like Chael versus Wanderlei as a drawing point, you need to build up the future. And the future is Michael Chandler. He's not the future. He's the present is Michael Chandler. And the future is Aaron Pico. They're both 155 pounders. They're both going to be more or less in showcase fights. Pico's fighting a tough guy, 8-2 record. Freeman's no walkover. But all the same, it's competitive. And then you just look at the title fights on this card. The Douglas Lima versus Lorenz Larkin fight.
That's a great fight.
That's the best title fight of the night, even though that people are psyched up for Michael Chandler. I get it. On the prelims, you're getting Phil Davis versus Ryan Bader, which is still a quality fight. Could easily be on a UFC card, no doubt. And then you just look at fights with James Gallagher versus Shinzo Machida. I mean, there's fun, intriguing matchups literally right across the board in this event. So on a weekend where you've got the UFC on the Sunday and the Bellator on the Saturday, a very big victory for Bellator would to be dominating those headlines on Monday morning. And they're putting out a better card on paper than the UFC is. So, I mean, that's worth noting. And I get this is a pay-per-view. You have to pay for it. But even this undercard, it's loaded.
It's a really strong undercard. I'm curious to see them fit these 4 fights, including a light heavyweight title fight, into a 2-hour block on Spike.
Yeah, and then I believe they got Mike Goldberg doing the Spike portion of the broadcast. So
and then Mauro Ranallo doing the pay-per-view portion.
Which is the way to go. I wasn't sure how they were going to split it up, but Mauro is just such a fantastic broadcaster. I think that once you already got the people to buy the pay-per-view, they're already invested, then hey, we're going to give you the quality broadcast you deserve. And then if you want to watch the Spike free portion, which should net more viewers obviously than the pay-per-view portion, Mike Goldberg is a familiar fan and a familiar face, familiar sound for fans. And why not? I mean, I think they're doing the right thing by bringing in name brand broadcasters as well as name brand fighters, as well as, you know, a name brand venue like Madison Square Garden. I mean, they're really pulling out all the stops for this pay-per-view event.
Is there an argument to be made? You know, the UFC, no matter what the grudge fight was, the title fight would go on in the main event position because they always wanted that statement that above all else, our champions they're the main event. They're not doing that for Bellator. Is there the argument that the fan has already bought the pay-per-view? If you're buying, it doesn't matter what you're buying it for, you've bought it, that your final shot is Michael Chandler and positioning him as your top fighter, your top lightweight in the world, if you want to? Or do you feel that this is the right way to go? Sonnen and Silva is driving the interest for this show, and it should be in that main event slot?
No, okay. So I actually have a couple thoughts on that. When you look at Chael Sonnen versus Wanderlei Silva on a stylistical fight standpoint, it could very well be a very bad fight. I mean, Chael Sonnen's going to clearly try to get this fight to the ground. Wanderlei Silva, not particularly known for his takedown defense. These type of fights, I mean, we don't know what to expect, and it very well could be a stinker. You don't want to end the night on a stinker. Matt Mitrione versus Fedor Emelianenko is 2 heavyweights who are known for their punching power, known for their finishing abilities, and it's almost certainly going to be a good fight. And Fedor, I believe that he's a bigger name than Chael Sonnen. I believe he's a bigger name than Wanderlei Silva. So I probably would have headlined with that. Now, the thing with the Michael Chandler Brent Primus fight is, if you were to give me the Chael Wanderlei fight, not me personally, but just as a casual fan, if you were to give somebody those 2 fights, which are huge fights, and they're out at the bar with their friends, and you know what, it's getting a little late, and I kind of want to get home, and I got stuff I got to do, but I really want to watch this Fedor fight, and I really want to watch this Chael versus Wanderlei fight. Those fights happen, and then you've got what could be 5 rounds of Michael Chandler versus some guy I've never heard of, or likewise, Ryan Bader versus Phil Davis. Or likewise, Lorenz Larkin versus Douglas Lima. They might not even know who those guys are. Everybody knows Fedor. Everybody knows Vandy. Everybody knows Chael. But those other guys we don't know. So it's not a guarantee that they're going to tune in. You'd think, oh, they already bought the pay-per-view. But it's not a guarantee that they're going to be watching it. Now, if you put Michael Chandler on before those fights, I would say it's almost a guarantee because, yes, they've already paid for it and they're getting ready for the big fights. And this is the fight that comes before the big fight. So I would say it would benefit quite largely. If this was Michael Chandler versus Justin Gaethje, then yeah, go with that. If this is Michael Chandler versus, you know, I don't know. I mean, what are the top lightweights could they have signed possibly? If it was a big name guy, Gilbert Melendez, if they were able to swing him or whatever the case is, then I could see going for it. But
Josh Thompson.
No, that's not big enough. Like, Josh Thompson hasn't fought in a while. He's kind of lost some of that rapport. He's an older fighter, and I just feel like fans really want something that they're viewing as an intriguing competitive matchup. And there's no denying with Chael versus Wanderlei, we just don't know which way it's going to go. It's a 50-50 fight. Literally, both guys got merit in this fight. And when you look at Matt Mitrione versus Fedor Emelianenko, it's literally split down the middle. It's 2 heavyweights. Those are competitive fights. With Michael Chandler with Chandler versus Thompson, yeah, Michael Chandler should just go in there and he should beat Josh Thompson, and plain and simple. The same thing with Brent Primus. That's why the interest just isn't as high. It's not viewed as competitive.
I just look at the formula that the reason you're signing all of these big names, the whole goal is that it now gives you the chance. You bring the eyeballs in to watch Sonnen and Silva, but you want to position your Chandlers and Limas as your future stars, as your present stars that can stand on their own. And to me, the perception, there is something to that. And you put them on the undercard, I think or at least underneath the main event. You know, there's arguments both ways. I just look at the fact that you do want to position these people as important and not just the appetizers for the main event.
Yeah, but you're trying to build storylines as well. I mean, the fact is Aaron Pico's 0-0 and he's on this main card pay-per-view. And like I said, at 155 pounds, which seems to be a division that Bellator has a lot of interest in, it's one of the better divisions in all in MMA. And when you have free agents popping up every day, I mean, you look at a guy like Joseph Duffy, you look at a guy like Ali Akinta that's voicing his displeasure, you look at guys that might never ever have that crack at the UFC gold. If they're willing to now depart the UFC and sign with Bellator, then you're just going to grow up the division. But you got to build it up. And the fact is this still is on the main card. People are still going to see it. And if Chandler goes out there and he has a spectacular performance, then that's going to be a talking point. And if Pico goes out there and he beats a 10-fight veteran in his very first fight, then now you've got grounds to fast-track this guy. So he's not going to fight for a title in his next fight, but you build this guy up quickly. Now there's an interest building around these guys. The only reason we really know about these guys is because we tuned in to see Fedor and Matt Mitrione, is because we tuned in to see Chael Sonnen versus Vanderlei. A lot of casual, if I called my buddies up, John, and I probably will, but if I called up my buddies and I said, listen, this Saturday, here's what's going on. We're going to order the Bellator pay-per-view. We're all going to get together. They'd be like, well, who's on the card? Oh, well, Michael Chandler, never heard of him. Well, Brent Primus, never heard of him. Douglas Lima and Lorenz Larkin. Yeah, I remember Lorenz Larkin. But there's Matt Mitrione, and Fedor. They recognize all those names. So we all get together and they're going to watch the fights with me. And in doing so, they're going to see Michael Chandler and they're going to see these guys. Now, the next time I hang out with them and I say, hey, do you guys want to watch some Bellator fights? Well, who's on? Michael Chandler. I remember that guy. And why do they remember him? Because they were tagged in to watch an event that featured guys that they knew. And they leave the night remembering these guys that they didn't know. So I think it's a winning formula, and I think Bellator's starting to gain some grounds in 2017.
How many buys does this do? Does this crack 150?
No, probably not.
I'm not feeling it. Yeah, the idea of doing 200 that Coker's thrown out there, I think that would be a home run. I would say.
What was it last time? 75?
100.
100, yeah. 150. This is a significantly better card than it was last time, but I don't know. I'm not really feeling the heat. Like I said, you're getting a free UFC card on the Sunday.
I think there's a lot out there that they will spend money for the big cards, but when it comes to, I don't think even looking ahead to UFC 213, I don't think that's a gimme that everyone's buying either. I think they're looking at it that Bellator is a free television product and you're putting your best Bellator card forward, but it's very much, you've educated your audience that you present your cards for free. It's a free system. It's very difficult to then say, hey, now this card is however much it's going to be, $45, $50.
Yeah, so if you actually look at the Bellator card, however, right, you could have, like, say, James Gallagher, Chinzo Machida. That would headline one of their Ireland shows. And then you got Ryan Bader versus Phil Davis. Well, that would headline one of their shows in Buckensville, Connecticut. And you look at all these guys that are just on the card, and they're all headlining free Bellator cards every other Friday throughout the year. And then you're having one event where you're putting all the guys that basically headline these events, all the best guys are on a pay-per-view, and they're asking you, are you going to pay for this one event? We've done one pay-per-view in the last 3 years, and it's all of our best guys. Not all of them, but a lot of our best guys. And we spent money, and we're pulling out all the stops, and we're making this as big as possible. Are you willing to support it that one time? Yeah, for sure. And I'm just looking at quality of matchups, and when I look at a UFC card can do bottom end a couple $100,000 for something like Demetrius Johnson, 175,000, 150,000. This card could do 150,000. The issue is it's Bellator. It's not UFC. And for that reason alone, it's not going to reach that peak. And so 150 be stretching. If it's 150, I think everyone's high-fiving and it's a party. If it's more close to 110, 115, that ballpark, I still think if you can dominate some of the headlines and have people talking about your fights as opposed to the UFC, it's still a win. It's still a good marketing move. It's still good for your cachet and your name brand appearance. But they obviously want to have 150 or plus.
Well, this card has, to me, the interest of, at least in the MMA sphere this week, Bellator, to me, is dominating the discussion because this Oklahoma City card on Sunday, to me, I would guarantee you, if you were to ask even regular UFC fans, is BJ Penn fighting or not this weekend?
Oh, yeah. No.
Half wouldn't know.
No.
It's a mystery.
He's curtain jerking on the main card.
He's opening the main card on Sunday night. Now, Kevin Lee and Michael Chiesa had that big moment at the press conference, and I think that's kind of carried the interest for that fight, let alone the fact that's a great fight at 155 pounds. You have Johnny Hendricks, Tim Boetsch. Like, this is a fine free television card. It just seems to me that it's in the shadows this weekend. And I don't know if BJ Penn's last performance is one that people that were such big fans of BJ Penn even want to see him this time around, where he could be in a fight where he very much struggles with the Dennis Seaver levels.
Yeah, well, to be honest, I mean, it's just not a fight that you can really get excited about, because if this was BJ Penn, Cole Miller, yeah, all right, BJ, maybe he's got one last hurrah on him. It's just they keep matching him up. And I'm not saying Dennis Seaver's a world beater by no means. He's been off for quite some time here. But stylistically, this is not a walk in the park for BJ. And I'm not saying fans want to see him in a walk in the park, but we want to see him in a realistic performance here. I don't want him to pull the Vitor Belfort situation where he goes out there against Nate Marquardt and he has a lackluster performance and all of a sudden I want 5 more fights. We all know the end's coming for BJ Penn, but this is just an odd spot for him. I feel like the UFC is going to head to Hawaii, especially with Max Holloway winning the UFC championship, especially with them having a plethora of good Hawaiian fighters on the roster. And I feel like that's his proper send-off here. But him coming in here and taking on Dennis Seaver, it's not necessarily a good look for him because it's hard to look good against Seaver. So what are the expectations with BJ? No expectations. He's looked so bad over the years that if he even has glimpses of promise, it would be a victory for him.
The last 2 fights, it's the worst emotion, I think, to leave a fight if you're a fan of the guy. It's not anger, it's sadness. It was sadness after Frankie Edgar, but it's Frankie Edgar. And then, I mean, the Yair Rodriguez fight, there were so many issues wrong with the matchmaking of that fight. And you saw that scenario play itself out.
Yeah, but you say his last 2 fights, but I mean, prior
you
to
can
that,
go
he's
beyond that, but
Rory
I'm specifically
McDonald
stating
and Nick Diaz.
I'm going, like, we're talking about a guy whose last victory was against Matt Hughes in 2010.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So it's so nice that fans still want to see the guy compete, but you got to put him in the right spots. And this is him curtain jerking on a free main card for an event that's really not even getting that much hype. And you look at some of the fights on that main card that he's below, and it just doesn't really make any sense. Like you said, it's very much flying under the radar. Why haven't we been seeing BJ Penn tributes leading up to this fight? Why haven't we been seeing, not a countdown special on a free event, but why is there not more focus on what could be his last fight or his triumphant return? The storyline's there. It's not a sexy matchup. Dennis Seaver has a big name if you want to consider he's fought some big name opponents and he's been to not the highest peak, but he's been a contender in the division, but he's just been off for so long, and he's not really, he doesn't speak English, so he's never really resonated with the fans beyond his spinning back kicks, and that was so long ago that people just often forget. So I think that there was better fights that they could have put a guy like BJ Penn in there with. And once again, what we've seen from BJ Penn at 145 pounds has been disastrous. So does this even work? Doesn't look like it does, but I guess we'll see on try number 3.
Beginning of the Ultimate Fighter season, I went hard with James Krause and you backing Jesse Taylor. It is not going to be our final matchup.
It should have been.
I think it should have been. I agree with you. Instead, they will meet next week in the semifinals. This after, I thought, a great fight involving James Krause and Ramsey Nijem. If you heard our interview last week with Ramsey, he was just glowing about this fight. Said, I can't wait till everyone sees it. And I was like, wow, this guy's either got the greatest poker face or he won the fight. He had to have. He was so high on this fight. And granted, I mean, it was a pretty close fight. I think that final round, you could argue either way. It was Krause who controlled him, but to me, Nijem did the significant damage in that final round. So it was a close fight.
Yeah. Honestly, 1-1 going into the third, and I did have Krause win in the third just with the top control, but that's the argument in MMA, which what wins the round? Is it the takedowns and the top control, or is it pure damage? And not only just damage after the fight, where you see Krause is significantly banged up and
there's that tease, Krause may not even be able to fight. So that was the tease.
Nijem's not, he can't replace him.
Well, typically in the past they've gone back and it's, whoever
when Dana
is
gave
healthy.
them the suggestion. Oh no, I don't know. I would put him back in there. But
also be a commission thing if Nijem would be cleared to come back and fight.
He just had a war, but
because
he would be the front runner for the return for sure if he could.
Nijem explained it was like before the Krause fight. I think his prior fight, it was like 6 days apart.
Yeah,
like you don't appreciate the gap when you're watching weekly, and it's been weeks since we saw Ramsey Nijem's last fight versus Krause, but it was something like 6 days apart or something like that if you go back and listen, and it's astounding.
So I was looking at Michael Chiesa fights leading up to obviously him fighting Kevin Lee this weekend, and he was on Tough Live, right? And he had to make 155,
the Ironman season.
155 pounds. James Vick, same thing, because they're both plus 6 feet. They're both massive lightweights, and you've got to make weight that many times in a 2-week, 3-week, month span tops. Astronomical, and in many cases exactly like.
And look at the names on that show.
Oh, stacked.
Iaquinta, Chiesa, Miles Jury was on that show. I mean, that was a loaded show, and it was done in real time to just for the live element to it. It was, I mean, they never went back to it. I think it was, they didn't really reap the rewards of being able to edit and tell those stories from a finished product, but the ringer that they put those guys through, it's brutal in the 6-week version, and what they did was nuts.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So, I mean, if Ramsey's healthy and he's able to come back, then yeah, you put him in there. Considering they let Joe Daddy have that type of quick turnaround, the thing is that you don't often see in fights is that you say, oh, this guy's unscathed, and then you see his medical suspension come out and it's 180 days with a broken hand, and you don't know that stuff until after the fact. So if he's healthy, you put him back in there. But I mean,
is this the unofficial final if Krause and Taylor do end up fighting?
That you put the fight back together?
No, I'm saying that if Krause and Taylor fight,
oh yeah,
I mean the winner will face the winner of Diego Lima and Tom Galicchio, which, I mean, Diego Lima, that presents an interesting fight for either guy. I guess you can't just assume. But I feel, though, Krause and Taylor, the winner of that would have to be the favorite in the final.
Well, to be honest, I thought that they were going to put Jesse Taylor against Diego Lima because they're both the guys that are actual welterweights in that house. Right. And it stylistical clash. But if anybody's going to be able to go out there, neutralize that grappling game of a guy like Diego Lima, take him down, put him on his back, out-grapple him, out-grind him, it's going to be a guy like Jesse Taylor. It was a fun fight. I liked the fight. And then likewise to that, Tom Galicchio, kind of a small welterweight, should be fighting at 155 pounds for sure. You stick him in there with James Krause, who's definitely a 155-pounder, and then you get an intriguing final where if Jesse Taylor wins, he's the tough champion. He's going to remain as a 170-pound fighter because there's no way in hell he could ever make 55. And Krause, win or lose, likely seems like he'd probably go back down. So that was, in my opinion, the fight to make. Putting this fight together now, it's just not as intriguing because Diego Lima, we've seen this guy in finals of Tough before. Mm-hmm. It's just... There's nothing really to sell for him other than the fact that he's the brother of Douglas Lima, and maybe people confuse.
I don't know if that'll get mentioned on the broadcast.
Who was I talking to?
His brother, champion in another organization.
Yeah, ridiculous. But yeah, no, I was talking to someone the other day, and they were like, he beat the former Bellator champ Douglas Lima. I was like, no, it's Diego Lima. He's like, oh, he confused them, and I was just like, oh, that's not so good.
Well, nonetheless, I've been intrigued by especially the quality of some of the fights that we have seen, and as we go into the final 2 episodes, my one big gripe is the fact that you're not going to know what the finals are until 2 days before the finale. The day before the weigh-ins is when you can promote this finals, because they're going to keep it secret up until then, which I think is always an error when they do this with Tough. I always think Ultimate Fighter should end the week prior, and you get a week and a half of promotion. Let them do some media. You've put all these resources into the season, and your big payoff is the finals on free television. So give yourself the opportunity to promote it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And also it shows you like scenes from the next episode, and it shows guys, going back and forth. What I've always liked is that the season ends, give it a couple weeks to let it marinate a little bit, but you have your finals, and then put some of these guys on the card. The issue now is that you look at this card and it's already almost complete with like a 9 or 10 fight.
I think it'll be the finals and one other fight. That's it.
That's exactly it. And I look back to like moments like the Ultimate Fighter Season 10 where, you have your finals with Brendan Shaw versus Roy Nelson. But the fight that people were really interested in was Marcus Jones versus Matt Mitrione.
Especially this year where more people are familiar with the names, even if they didn't watch the season.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that there's a use for these guys. If you're going to dedicate X amount of weeks into giving these guys TV time and giving them exposure, then you have to at least get something out of it. One fight deal, sink or swim. If you beat the guy from this season, you're in. If you lose this guy this season, you're out. It's as simple as that. There's the storyline right there. People have already emotionally invested time into them if they've watched that season of Tough. And if they haven't seen that season of Tough, do you really think any of these guys are any less known? Is Gilbert Smith or Diego Lima or Johnny Nunez, are any of those guys less known than some of the guys fighting on this card? Josh Stansbury, does he have any more name cachet with a casual fan than any of the other guys on Tough? So no, give it to the guys that have invested their time on Tough. If you're still a fan of The Ultimate Fighter, you deserve to see some of these guys fight, right? You're paying attention to the show, and it'd be nice to see some of them on the finale.
Also, last week's show was their highest number of the season. So I want to thank all the MMA Report listeners for tuning in and hearing Ramsey Nijim that clearly boosted that number to record-setting level for this season of Tough. We're going to stay on the theme of Tough, kind of, because up next is the Season 8 winner, Ryan Bader, who's making his Bellator debut this Saturday night, challenging Phil Davis in a rematch from their fight in January of 2015. It's happening 8 Eastern on Spike, and here's my conversation with Ryan Bader. Bellator will be heading to Madison Square Garden. They are returning to pay-per-view, and that night will also feature a 2-hour portion on Spike TV, which is headlined by the light heavyweight championship being defended by Phil Davis against the man who joins us, one of the newest members of the Bellator roster. He is Ryan Bader. And my first question, when I introduce you like that as a member of the Bellator roster, is it still new to you, Ryan, to be introduced as such?
Yeah, it does a little bit, but I'm excited about it. I love what the organization represents, and talking to all the higher ups up there, that's why I came over. One of many things, and so I'm proud about it for sure.
Was this a long decision process for you to make? Obviously, it was a big change in your career. Tell us just a bit about that decision process and making that decision to come to Bellator.
Yeah, it's a long story, but, quickly, it was really, UFC always signs you with one fight left on your contract, and I took a fight in Germany, knocked a guy out, and then I turned around and took a short notice fight with Nogueira down in Brazil, and it's one of those things where they said, all right, we took the fight, and they said, all right, we need to get a new contract, and we kind of told them, like, this is going to be, we're going to fight our contract out, see what we're worth outside of the UFC, and so we did that. I went and met with higher ups in Bellator. Loved what they have to say. It was all about opportunity for me. It was about different things, the way I was treated. I want to help grow an organization, but I also want them to help promote me also. So there's a ton of different factors. But when I knew we were fighting the UFC contract out, I was pretty sure that it could be my last UFC fight. And so we kind of knew leaving that if we got what we were looking for, the UFC wouldn't want to match that, wouldn't match it, and we were going to be a Bellator fighter. So I did, and I'm super excited about that. I signed. The day after I signed, they come out that they're having a fight in Madison Square Garden in New York, and it just reassured everything that I was doing was the right thing.
Is this the first time you've ever competed at Madison Square Garden? Did you ever wrestle there?
No, I did not. Yeah, it's the first time I've competed. I haven't competed in New York City ever, so I'm super excited about that. Madison Square Garden's a venue that, all of us fighters aspire to fight in, it's one of those nostalgic, venues, and it's a bucket list venue for a lot of fighters. So I'm super excited about that. Not only that, though, I get to fight for a title. I get to win a title in Madison Square Garden.
I imagine that, fighting for a title is something that, just about every fighter, that is the goal. And it's funny because we look back at your first fight when you beat Phil Davis, and that was the same night that Alexander Gustafsson loses that night in the main event, and yet he was the guy that got the title fight out of that opportunity. Did you feel at the time that it was almost like you're banging your head against the wall? Like, am I ever going to get a title shot fighting for this promotion? Because that seemed to be the opening.
Well, I think that was the beginning of the whole transition to here we are today.
Right.
It was Bellator. I had a long win streak. I was even on, I was on the phone with Dana White, asking for a title shot to fight Cormier, and I was on a long win streak then, and he said, I think we'd go with somebody else. I said, who? He said, Alexander Gustafsson. And I said, after a knockout loss, he's going to get a title shot? So right then and there, it was kind of like, if I'm not going to get it now, I'm not going to get it ever, unless I literally, take the Max Holloway approach and beat everybody in front of me, I've lost some key fights in the UFC here and there, but there was times when I could have been put in there, with Cormier and fighting for the title. And so that was one of the times where I just had to shift my thinking and just say, all right, let's go out here, win the fight in front of you, and then we'll figure it out later, And so, last couple of fights, from the last loss on, I've had a new mental attitude going into fights. I'm going to go in there. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to keep it light the week of, in the locker room right before. That's when I fight my best. So I would say, that was definitely one of the beginning of the end, for being my UFC career.
Hey, after that fight, of course, that's when Phil Davis made his own move to Bellator. Did you at all kind of keep tabs on Phil Davis and watching what he was doing in the light heavyweight division and knowing that, hey, I have fought this guy, I have a victory over this guy, and it's interesting how you two have been kind of tied together over these last number of years.
Yeah, no, I definitely was watching his moves, and then, watching him come over and get in that tournament and go through and win that tournament and then become the champion, is one of those things I was definitely keeping tabs on, and I've been in there with that guy. It was a close fight last time, but I feel like I've grown so much since that first fight that I'm a whole new fighter, and I'm going to show that going in here next weekend. So, for me, it's just a super exciting time. I've only had one other rematch in my career, and for me, it's something to go in there and prove how much better I've gotten since then. So I'm super excited about the venue. I'm super excited about the opponent, and I finally get my title shot. So things couldn't be better.
Now that you've had the opportunity as well for this fight, that you're back in the world where you're open to sponsorships, is the sponsorship industry, is it drastically different from the one you left pre-Reebok? What's that side of things been like for the business of Ryan Bader?
Oh, no, I would say it's the same, from the glory days of the UFC sponsorship. I've kind of touched on this in other interviews and whatnot, but, for me, we lost a lot when the Reebok came in. We lost probably, more than, I probably got a third of what with Reebok of what I was getting, on a bad day, and so for us, it's huge. We've had sponsors lined up for this fight 2 months ago,
Wow.
And that's an attachment to my management. Dave Martin always did a great job with that, and we've had, not just we've always had a great relationship with these big blue chip sponsors like, Cyto Sport, American Ethanol, stuff like that. And then they stuck by us when Reebok was there on a very minuscule, compared to what they were doing, approach. But now they're back full force, and I'm excited to represent them to the fullest, and they're getting behind me to the fullest. And so for me, it was one of those things where we always did well with sponsorship, and people that were complaining, it was because their management was lazy and they're out there trying to just poach stuff off of shorts, and then when that dries up, they're like, oh, sponsorship is dried up, we can't get any more. But that's not the case.
Privately, is there a lot of envy amongst other fighters that they look at you and wish that they could be in your situation, ones that might be fighting for the UFC at the moment, and that's their reality. They have to deal with certain deals that the UFC has imposed, and it's either, hey, you comply or you're not going to fight.
I wouldn't say animosity or anything. Like, nobody came up and said, man, whatever, animosity-wise. But I've heard, people have talked to me and they're like, man, I have freaking 5 fights left in my contract. I wish I can get out of it, this and that, and so, I'm happy that I got out when I did, and it's a perfect time for me, and, it was one of those things where how the fights went with my last couple fights in my UFC career, it happened sooner rather than later. Like I said, the last fight on my contract, I took on a short notice. So, I thought I was there for another at least 6 months or so, but that just happened to come. I fought in September, I turned around and fought in November, and I was out of my contract and was able to negotiate. So I have been getting a lot of that, of high-level fighters, UFC fighters, even saying, man, I have 5 fights left in my contract. I wish I can just get out of it.
Also, you've made mention of the fact that Power MMA, you guys have left your former facility, but is the team all still intact? And what did you have to do during this camp when that change occurred?
Oh yeah, the team's all intact. We're doing well. We just went over to it was actually, we had a big facility, it was almost 30,000 square feet. Our lease was up, and we didn't want to continue in that facility. It's too much wasted space and whatnot. And so we actually went over to my buddy Erik Magraken's wrestling facility, which was even bigger than the space that the pro team was actually training in. We were training in the back room and in the cage in the 30,000 square foot facility, to make room for the kids jiu-jitsu and all that. So actually, I just purchased the building here, and we should be in July, and so we're going to move that gym into 2 miles down the street from the old gym, but it's just a more cost efficient 10,000 square foot gym instead of a 30,000 square foot gym. So and we own the building, so that's a plan. But we've been training the teams together. We got Jair Lorenko, that's been awesome. He was with me with my last fight, and he has he comes from Novignal. He's Henan Brow's coach, and Henan Brow's been training exclusively with us, and so everything's all good.
And as we finish off here, as you're going into this week, fighting for Bellator for the first time, how would you classify just your overall feelings going into this? Are there nerves? Are there excitement? It's a different promotion you're with. It's a big championship fight for you. Of course, the stage is a very big one. You're going to be fighting in front of likely more than 1 million viewers. It's got to be it's kind of like a new chapter in your career, if you want to classify it as that.
Yeah, if there's one word, I'd probably say refreshing. Going in there, it's just everything is new, and it's, I went out to my first Bellator event. I was treated so well. It was just a stark contrast. It just felt amazing. And yeah, it's going to be new for me. But I fought all over the world. I fought in different organizations. Before the UFC, I fought in a bullfighting ring in Mexico. It doesn't matter where we're going to be fighting. When that bell rings, you're going to fall back on what you know. But it's just really refreshing. I'm super excited. The UFC, like if I look back, I can't really tell the fights apart, because the smell is the same. The canvas gives off a certain smell. The knockouts are all the same. Everything's, they have it dialed in a certain way. So this is going to be something new. It's going to be refreshing. I'm going to be more excited about it. I'm going to feel good going out there, and I'm going to just soak it all in.
And it looks like one consistency will be Mike Goldberg will be calling your fight. So that's something similar.
Yeah, I got a text from him, yesterday when they released that he's going to be calling the fight and we're going to be reunited there. So, that's not going to be any different. He's a friend of mine. We're both here, Arizona boys. So, that's just another, peg in the board there where they're moving in the right direction. Like I said, I signed, I see that they, we're going to fight in Madison Square Garden the next day. That just reaffirmed everything. Then they're pulling over more guys and high level guys. If you look at this card, it's unbelievable. You have those big fights, like the Vanderlei and Sonnen and whatnot. Not to say that they're not in the prime or anything. And you have the guys that are, a legit contender, could be best in the world, like the Chandlers, Lorenz Larkin and Lima, Phil and I. So this is a great card, and I'm super excited about it.
That was Ryan Bader joining us. Once again, he will be challenging Phil Davis this coming Saturday night, 8 Eastern on Spike. And the way the broadcast is going to be divided up, Mike Goldberg will be calling the Spike portion, and then the pay-per-view portion will be called by Mauro Ranallo, with Jimmy Smith serving as the analyst. And that was announced last week, the signing of both Ranallo and Goldberg. They were in New York, getting set for this show, and moving forward, they're going to be split up over cards in the future for the Bellator organization. And this is a rematch from January of 2015. On that night, Bader won by split decision. It was a very close fight, and we touched on it in the interview, the fact that same night, Alexander Gustafsson was stopped in the first round by Anthony Johnson, and yet it was Gustafsson who in his next fight would get the light heavyweight title shot. And you have to imagine the frustration for Ryan Bader not getting that Daniel Cormier fight later on in the year. Now we're going to switch, and we're going to stay in the world of Bellator and check in with lightweight champion Michael Chandler. I always enjoy chatting with Michael Chandler. He is, bar none, one of my favorite fighters to watch. I think that putting him on this pay-per-view card, we talked about it with Cody earlier. I feel that you could have put this on last just for the perception value that this is one of our stars. I don't think there's any doubt that they're going to have a solid fight. I mean, you never know what's going to happen, but Michael Chandler is about as sure of a thing as there is to having an exciting fight. And not to say that this is the fight that is the biggest marquee fight on the card, but I think that you're trying to pay this forward and build up that perception that, yes, we have Chael Sonnen. Yes, we have Vanderlei Silva and Fedor, but these are the stars that are in their prime now. These are the guys that we have to build this around that are going to be fighting in 3 to 4 years' time for us. So Michael Chandler, he meets Brent Primus. He is an undefeated fighter. Not a whole lot of attention given to this fight or to Brent Primus. But speaking with Michael Chandler, he spoke with me about numerous topics, and a guy that has been with Bellator now coming up on 7 years, has been through both regimes, and watches as Bellator returns to pay-per-view. So here he is, Michael Chandler, joining me on the MMA Report. This has got to be a big one for you as someone that has been with the Bellator organization as long as you have. This feels like a big milestone within the promotion's history.
Yeah, it sure does, man. This is the epitome of what you want to fight for. You know, you want to get big fights. You want to fight for world titles. You want to win world titles. And you want you want to fight at the biggest venues possible, and it doesn't get any bigger than Madison Square Garden, and it doesn't get any more meaningful than defending your belt. You know, so this is it's a milestone for Bellator. It's a milestone for myself. This is my 20th fight. You know, so I can't think of a better venue to hold my 20th anniversary fight. You know, so it's cool. It's a milestone for both the organization and myself, and I'm excited to go out there and compete.
Do you feel that now it's been a number of years since Scott Coker has come in? I mean, I'm sure you've heard from him of what his own vision was. Does now feel like that time where everything has kind of taken shape, and this is a big statement from Bellator, not just running Madison Square Garden, but going back to pay-per-view. I think it's the signal that it's gotten everything into alignment, and we're starting to really see that vision play itself out with this card.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's just a testament to Scott Coker's vision and Viacom, Spike TV, Kevin K, John Flusser, these guys coming in and having that foresight to be able to say Bellator is going to be an organization that we can build. You know, we need another big organization in the industry, and that's what they've done. And it's taken a couple of years, but now you see the growth and you see the big name signings and you see the free agents deciding that maybe, you know, the UFC isn't where I want to be anymore. And maybe having sponsors is something that I do truly want, you know, and I can't tell you whether it's good, great, or horrible to fight for the UFC, but I can tell you that, you know, it's been great for me to fight for Bellator, and they're as fair and honest as they can be as fight promoters. You know, it's a dog-eat-dog world. You know, what have you done for me lately type of business, and it's ruthless at times, but I'm extremely happy with my growth under the Bellator banner. I'm extremely happy with Bellator's growth, and it's cool to be a part of every big fight that they put on. You know, I always show up and I always perform and I always put on explosive performances, and I've been a part of some of the biggest fights that Bellator has had and probably ever will have. So it's been cool to be a part of it and see their growth and my growth as well. And it doesn't get any bigger than Madison Square Garden. So June 24th is going to be a phenomenal night for many, many reasons.
Did you ever get to compete, like, wrestling-wise at Madison Square Garden, or is this the first time you're ever going to be competing at this venue?
No, this is the first time I will ever competed at Madison Square Garden. I've only really been there one or two other times. Twice actually. Once for a bull riding event, the PBR goes there, and then I went to a Knicks game a couple months ago whenever we had the press conference and set cage or floor seats at the Knicks game. So it was like really cool. My wife and I got to do that. Spike hooked it up with some really cool floor seats, so it was awesome.
What was bull riding like at the Garden?
It was great. Well, it's crazy to see a venue like Madison Square Garden covered in dirt. You know, bull riding, they throw a bunch of plywood down over the floor. So they put the plywood down, they put the tarp down, and then they throw a bunch of dirt in. They bring a bunch of truckloads of dirt in, throw the dirt down, put in the chutes and all the pins and put a bunch of livestock in there, a bunch of bulls, and bulls are pooping everywhere, and they got to clean it all up afterwards. But it's a good show, man. Bull riding is definitely one of my favorite sports to watch, and one of my favorite sports. So it was cool to be able to go there and hang out with all those guys and watch the riding.
You've had the experience of there's cards where a lot of the promotional obligations fall on your shoulders. You're expected to really take hold of that element of things. And then there's others where it is spread around. Do you have a preference when you're going into a card that this is one where it's not one that you have to simply shoulder yourself? You're certainly a big part of this card, but there are numerous attractions on this particular event on June 24th.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm completely honest, you always want more promotion. You know, I mean, I think my fight has really flown under the radar. You know, I don't think they've really promoted my fight a ton. I'm not going to say they haven't done a great job. That's just the way that they're choosing to promote it. They're choosing to really promote the two main fights, when really, you know, my fight, Lima's fight, Bader and Davis, those are the big fights, the world title fights. But, you know, Bellator's got they have their strategy, I guess, if you will. They have what they're doing, and I've spent too much time and energy worrying about how they promote fights, and I told myself I wasn't going to do it anymore, and I'm not. So I've had a phenomenal training camp, not worried about the lack of promotion or the lack of build-up, if you will. I just hope a lot of people buy the pay-per-view, and I hope either way, I'm going out there. Whenever it's my time to shine, I'm going to go out there and knock somebody out. And that's kind of all I can control, and that's really what I control or what I focus on these days.
Is there a difference for you fighting on Spike versus a pay-per-view? Like if this pay-per-view reaches a certain level of buys, are you figured into that, or is this the same as if you were fighting on Spike?
I have a deal in place that I probably I won't get into, but
right.
Yeah, I have a deal in place, and so there's definitely some perks of pay-per-view, if you will. So it's good, man. I have a good contract, and I have phenomenal management, and we have a good understanding of each other's side, both Bellator side and our side. So we got a good situation going.
See, I have stated this many times in the past, so I'm not just saying this because you're on the line, but I always believe that if I were running Bellator and I had one guy that I had to build things around, I'm saying Michael Chandler all day long. And that's why I feel that for an event like this, I want my Michael Chandlers and Douglas Limas at the forefront here when the spotlight is the biggest, because there's definitely a lot of attraction to seeing Chael Sonnen and Vanderlei Silva, but in growing my core fan base, it's imperative that they be aware of the Michael Chandlers and the Douglas Limas because they're here for the long haul.
Yeah, well, I'd say you're a very smart man. I think I don't know, not that they aren't. I appreciate that, and I think I'm just one of those guys who always goes out there and kind of lays it on the line and gets after it. So go out there and explode and show what I can do.
Now, when I look at the last number of years for Michael Chandler, there's this pattern of you fighting in November, come back in June, fight November, June, and this is the third cycle where it's a November to June turnaround. Is this just a coincidence, or is there a thought process to this kind of turnaround time and ideal amount of fights you like to do in a year?
Yeah, it's not me. I mean, I would like to fight more. And I've kind of expressed that and I've shown that, but I'm just believing that there's going to come a time when I look back and say, well, it was good that I only fought November and June, and I preserved my body and my brain and the structural integrity of my joints. So I got an amazing life and an amazing opportunity to live a cool life that I get to live, and so I can't complain. I've not always been happy with 6-7 months in between fights, but it happens, and it's also part of being the champion. When you're not the champion, you can get all kinds of fights, but when you're the champion, there's only so many contenders, and Bellator has done a good job of building guys and continuing to try to sign guys to fight me in the lightweight division. And good thing there's a welterweight division for me to go up to if I need to. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what the future holds.
Do you find that I mean, it's got to be I at least somewhat frustrating that you're taking on an opponent in Brent Primus who he's an undefeated fighter, dangerous opponent, but he's not an opponent that the general public is going to know all that much about. Do you think that somehow does prohibit the promotion of this fight, in your opinion, when it's people are tuning in, they know you're fighting, but they know less about your opponent?
Yeah, maybe that could be part of it. I think, I mean, at the end of the day, there's only so many minutes that you can promote a fight. There's only so much energy you can put towards promoting the fight, and there's only so much money, and so many platforms that you can use to promote a fight. And they're good at promoting fights. I don't mean by what I said earlier that they're not doing a good job of promoting the fight. I'm happy. They could do zero promotion and I could care less. I got one job, and that job is to go out there and get in a fist fight, and it's definitely part of it, probably that Brent Primus is more of a less known guy. But then again, you could look at it on the other side and say, well, he's a less known guy, so let's give him some promotion and let's let the fans get to know who he is and hype this fight up. See if we can get some sound bites. And, that's what these interviews are for, I guess. And, we're going to keep on moving forward, and we're only 10 days away. And it's, I'm going to look back on this and say, man, it was a cool opportunity. It was a cool stage, a cool platform. And Bellator's done a good job.
Have you been in Florida this entire camp?
Yes. I've been down here the whole time. Been down here, it'll be 9 weeks total.
And with Henry Hooft now kind of operating his own system, tell us a bit about that environment for yourself and some of the people you've surrounded yourself leading into this fight.
Yeah, it's great, man. He's got a good kickboxing system. He's got his gym there, Combat Club, with Greg Jones Wrestling. Gilbert Burns is running the jiu-jitsu, and Henry's running the kickboxing, obviously. And I've been down here for the whole training camp with 4-time All-American wrestler from Minnesota, Logan Storley. So me and him have been mixing it up on the ground and the wrestling, and Henry's obviously been showing me all of the kickboxing stuff and distance and movement and all that kind of stuff, and sparring with Michael Johnson and the laundry list of UFC guys we have here, and Robbie Lawler's in there. Luke Rockhold was here a couple weeks ago. So it's been a good training camp, a plethora of guys, short guys, big guys, tall guys, bunch of different body types to be able to go with, because there's always about 20 guys in our sparring sessions, and most of them are around my weight. So I can go with the smaller than me but faster than me guys. I can go with the bigger guys who hit really hard and are dangerous, and I can go with all kinds of dynamic guys. So it's all about just kind of training with everybody and learning different movements and different tendencies. And there's nothing that Brent Primus that can throw at me June 24th that I haven't seen and haven't trained for. So I'm prepared. I'm 100% trained and ready to go.
Something I've been curious to ask you. The last mixed martial arts card at Madison Square Garden, it was Conor McGregor and Eddie Alvarez. And I think there's few fighters out there that have the experience and knowledge of what Eddie Alvarez can do in a fight. And I remember being there covering it and thinking, I wonder what Michael Chandler is thinking of this version of Eddie Alvarez. You know what he can do. Was it almost, I'm sure you watched the fight, was it almost frustrating to watch knowing what Eddie is capable of?
Yeah, it was, man. It definitely was not his best performance. He's capable of so much more. But you got to give credit to Conor, man. Conor brings out the worst in people. He really does. He can take a phenomenal fighter and get in their head and make them go out there and perform like an amateur, and that's what he's good at. That's what he's done. So my hat's off to both of those guys. They're both phenomenal competitors. It would have been awesome to have seen Eddie go out there and fight like I know he can fight. And that was my prediction. I got a ton of flack for it from all the Conor nut huggers, because I picked Eddie to win, and I said Eddie was going to weather the early storm, and Eddie was going to kind of break him down a little bit, and Conor was going to give up like he did against Nate Diaz. But I stand corrected, and I was wrong. So, it was tough to see him see him go out like that, but I think he's going to bounce back, and who knows, maybe we'll see a Chandler versus Alvarez 3 down the line.
Is part of you curious to see how Brent Primus adjusts to this stage that he's on? It's not just a championship fight, but it's on pay-per-view. It's at Madison Square Garden. And, I mean, you've been in these big situations before. He has not. And I imagine every fighter is different in how they adapt to these scenarios, but he's in a very high-pressure situation here.
Yeah, he is. But, I think we're going to find out what he's made of. He could be the next big talent to come out and shock everybody and come out and just fight like like someone we've never seen before, or we could see him go out there and crumble, or we could just see a guy who fights his heart out, but he's just not enough he's not enough to beat me, So we're going to see who Brent Primus really is this fight. We're going to see what the hype is about. We're going to see what his undefeated record is going to add up to when he steps into the cage with the baddest dude in the lightweight division. And I'm excited to be that guy. I'm excited to be that guy that the next generation gets to test themselves against, because I'm exactly where I need to be. I'm exactly as skilled as I need to be, and I'm the best that I've ever been, the most confident that I've ever been. So it's time to go out there, and when the lights turn on, it's time to close that cage door and get after it. So I can't be more excited.
Well, I completely am looking forward to this fight. I feel when Michael Chandler fights, it is must-see, and it's going to be happening next Saturday night, June the 24th, on pay-per-view at 10 Eastern. It'll start on Spike at 8 Eastern, total of 3 championship fights, including Michael Chandler and Brent Primus, and we look forward to whatever is next. Hopefully, Michael, we'll be talking about another fight for you before November, and you can break the pattern.
I'll tell you what, I appreciate it, man. That would be great. Hopefully before then, and I appreciate the kind words, John, and I will talk to you very soon.
All right, that was Michael Chandler. He will be part of Bellator's pay-per-view this Saturday night, 10 Eastern, as Michael Chandler defends his title against Brent Primus. That's happening at Madison Square Garden, and that is going to bring an end to the show. It's amazing we had this whole show, and I don't think we talked about Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor once, which is probably the smart play, because there will be lots of discussion about that fight over the next couple of months, and certainly on this show. One interesting note from this past week, as I break the streak, was Adi Attar, the manager for Conor McGregor, appearing on the MMA Hour this past week and announcing that Conor McGregor, when it comes to athletic apparel, he has no contract with any apparel company. Not Reebok. He is a free agent in the athletic apparel market, which is astounding that was able to time itself out to this fight, where you would assume he's going to make top dollar to walk into that ring with a prominent logo on his shorts. That's going to be, that side of things is very fascinating. We will chat about that fight more. This fight is going to dominate headlines over the next 2 months. We will be on top of it as well. I want to thank Michael Chandler, Ryan Bader, Erik Magraken, and Cody Saftic for joining us. This coming weekend, we have the Bellator card Saturday, and then UFC is back on Sunday night. It's a rare Sunday card taking place from Oklahoma City. Michael Chiesa taking on Kevin Lee. Tim Boach meets Johnny Hendricks. You've got Felice Herrig against Justine Kish. Also on the main card, Tim Means fights Alex Garcia, and opening up the main card will be BJ Penn taking on Dennis Seaver. You've also got Clay Guida and Eric Koch on the undercard. Carla Esparza is fighting Marina Moros. So some interesting fights on this card. It is definitely being dwarfed by Bellator's card the night prior, but to a lot of people, they're going to opt to watch the free card the next night rather than spend money on fights. So this one will get some attention on Sunday night, and I think it's a quality main event between two solid parts of the lightweight division in Kevin Lee and Michael Chiesa, who have been on great runs in one of the deepest divisions in the sport. That's going to wrap things up. You can subscribe to the MMA Report with John Pollock on iTunes. You can follow me at I Am John Pollock, and we will speak with you next week on the MMA Report.